Hello and welcome to an episode of Power on Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Taylor, and with me is the seemingly in control Sushi B. How's it going?
I'm all right. We're gonna have to keep you under control.
Oh boy,
You're really off the chain. Wow.
Different. I'm just
Control yourself.
crazy. Yeah.
Have some self-control.
Self-control.
Have some class.
Keep it together.
This isn't one of your barroom brawls. Have some class.
You're right. Yeah, I still need to get through that.
Yeah, you will.
Slowly.
Yep. Take your time. It's enjoyable to take your time with that.
Binge watching it.
Yeah. Forget it all 10 minutes later.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm one of those that don't like to have I like the Blu-rays of them. So partly why I've been kind of going slow is I still got to get the last one of them.
Right.
Because I have seasons 1, 2, and 3. Just
oh, nice.
4. So, yeah. So, but yeah, how's it going?
Not too bad. You proposed this topic a little earlier this week, and I thought, let's do that. That's a nice. I think we try our best to pick something a little thought-provoking or challenge ourselves, and this one doesn't quite take as much effort, I guess, to kind of. Well, it doesn't, right? That's the truth. So, but it's good. I'm glad this is a topic we can just kind of casually jump into, and
it has been something that I know other people have done it. We've never really talked about controllers. I don't think
a little bit, like not. I feel like we have, but not to a large degree of time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall, sitting down and necessarily doing any particular part of any of the previous episodes to dive deep into controllers. The one thing that I do remember was when we did the video game Olympics, and we had one of the contests would have been how far can you throw a controller. Yeah. I think we had like various types of controllers to throw, some with cables, some without, and so that came to mind the other day when you did propose this.
Oh goodness!
We may have to need to do an update on that. That topic was
digging deep into the vault.
Yeah, well, and I remember one of yours was, what was it? Something couch sitting or something, like who can stay and fester in their own juices the longest or something. I think you even had them in like a glass case or something.
Chris Angel style
on a sofa.
I don't know if I had it that detailed, but maybe I did.
Just, I don't even know what's the word I'm looking for. Soaking in their own Cheeto juice or whatever.
Cheeto juice.
Like just
so gross.
Like the Cheeto cheese just pouring out of your pores and just like the grease glands of your body.
I don't quite remember being that graphic.
I can't remember, but it was. You did say something that was pretty funny. Something maybe not quite in that line, but something to do with sitting so long, like the discomfort of sitting for 24 hours or something like that. No bathroom break.
I know. I certainly would get to a point where it'd just be like, I'm good. Yeah. Don't need it.
I could maybe do a couple hours at most and be done with that event.
But, yeah. Controllers. I guess to start this off, I'm going to start it off in just a very wonky way.
Okay.
And we get the added benefit of being able to experience an evolution of these things. Because they've really ever since the PS2 design, the Xbox is kind of, it leans in its own way, but it's still pretty similar. But the 2 joysticks and everything, since it's been that, it's not done too much alterations. Nintendo will kind of be like, oh, let's try it with a remote. Let's try it with the Switch and stuff.
Right.
But we got to see it from from a little bit of a different perspective. My memory, like I didn't play the Atari as much, so that joystick with the button,
Single button.
I'm right. I'm not as familiar with, we'll say, but I definitely cut my teeth with the regular Nintendo. You can date somebody by whether that or not they know that to say that instead of the Super Nintendo.
You didn't get to experience some of those weird controllers, such as the Intellivision and the ColecoVision. Like the Intellivision had that one that looked like it was a telephone and had that weird spinning disc thing on the bottom, and it had
no.
You'd slide in these cards that would go on the top. They were like these overlays. So it was like, I think it was 1 to 9. Like it almost looked like a phone, and then you put those overlays into this little. There was a little slit that allowed you to slide them into that part of the controller to sit on top, and they had this button was your fire button. This was to go up, down, left, right. This
and it would change depending on the game.
Yeah. So it kind of quite innovative, honestly, at the time.
That is pretty neat.
Yes, it was quite neat, and I can't remember what the sort of dial thing did for certain games. Like I don't recall, but there was kind of an interesting innovation for sure.
No, but I cut my teeth with the NES one, and then like a Cro-Magnon being shown fire. Got to see like the Super Nintendo and the Sega, like the Genesis controllers, and going, oh my gosh, there's more than 2 buttons.
Right.
4 technically with the start.
I would assume an Atari player would have said the same thing when they saw an NES pad, which looked so different than a joystick, which looked much closer to the arcade experience.
Right. Yeah. That is, I guess, something because I didn't really play too many arcade games, so I don't really ever think of this is just more of a portable arcade stick-ish sort of thing. But no, that step there, did you have a similar kind of, what is this kind of?
Sort of. Like, it's hard to, I don't recall that well, I suppose. But also, I
did. It blew my mind.
Yeah, I don't recall. I can't remember exactly what I thought, but as time has gone on and having collected a lot of consoles and so forth, like I have a really weird Radio Shack Pong clone machine that I've never seen anywhere on any like sort of YouTube channels or anything. I'm sure there are people that have it, but I got it in the original box and everything. This thing must be 78, maybe 79. It must have come out, something like that. And it's a really funky looking thing. I might have to send you a picture. The box is quite poor condition, but I'll have to probably send you a picture of what this thing looks like. But I can see that evolution of, again, maybe from that Atari era to NES, which, now you have this thing that goes into 2 hands, essentially. I know you probably hold one to stabilize the controller for Atari or whatever, or one to push the button while you were moving around with the joystick. But just a completely different design. And then since that NES design, controllers have kind of at least stayed in the same holding position for the most part. The Wiimote, I know, is definitely one that's a little different, and I guess the Switch as well.
But even then, the Wiimote, throw it horizontally is just a oddly micro version of
generally intended to not be used that way, and there were definitely games that did, obviously, but generally meant to seem to be, they wanted you to use the motion controls for a lot of games.
Right. Now, see, this is something that you would have had versus what I would have, because you certainly dipped back into doing collecting and stuff.
Right.
And I remember after getting a 64, selling a lot of those old NES games to basically be able to buy GoldenEye.
Yeah, get the newfangled.
Right. Well, it wasn't newfangled. It was just that. That was just being poor enough to salvage what little bit I had to be able to get it. Because
a lot of people did that, though, right? They would trade in your N64 to get a PS2 or whatever. Like there's a lot of people that did that stuff because it made sense, and you felt like you were kind of getting on from that previous item, right? So might as well trade it in and get the new model, like trading in a car almost or something. So
Right.
Yep.
So where was I going with that? Shoot. I don't remember
you were
what
talking about getting GoldenEye.
Right, yeah, no, I was trying to figure out why I was saying that, though.
Something to do with the N64 controller?
Yeah, no, we'll get to that. I mean, that's been ballybooed about a bunch. But no, so in doing that, but I severed the connection of, like, the NES and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until way down the line that getting Famicom and getting, like, the dog bone controller.
Okay.
And also just seeing them, after being back in the States as well, how tiny they are. They are really tiny controllers. Mm. And I was like, man, I don't know how I even played anything on these things. These things are like really, really, really tiny, and they cramp your hands, or at least they cramp my hands. Whenever I try to like play something like that. Mm. But I don't know, because there's that long disconnect. It was weird to go back and have that where, I don't know, I would imagine you wouldn't have quite the same sort of feel because there's a little bit more of a tethered connection there. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. It's hard to say. And when you get into a point that when you are collecting things and you're obviously you're using the items, you're enjoying them and everything, controller affinity was not usually the big thing for me, right? Like, if there was a specific controller that came with a console, I just stuck with it. Mm-hmm. And, like, I wouldn't go and buy a third-party type controller. And there are not all. There are some examples of third-party controllers being quite good. But generally speaking, if you can stick with the hardware models, mm-hmm. They're usually a little more sturdy, right? They usually have a little better, I guess, time frame of life without breaking down and that sort of thing. They should be somewhat more reliable. There are some cases where I've heard of some really good third-party stuff, but so I just kind of stuck with it and was like, okay, well, that's just the controller that comes with this machine, like, and that's it.
Those kind of mock Super Nintendo controllers for the Super Nintendo Mini Classic.
Okay.
Those seem to be okay. I haven't had really any problems with them. I think, weren't you kind of jealous that I ended up getting this thing? The 8-bit Do SN30 Pro?
SN30, yeah. I've been looking for one for a while, and I'm just not really willing to bite at the price points that I've been seeing them at. So
yeah, which is basically a Super Nintendo with two joysticks. Yeah, which
looks like a nice controller.
It is a nice controller. Works very well. I don't know. Like, I'm kind of with you. Like, I don't have like an affinity. It's basically, this is the thing I use to play the game. Like, I don't quite have as like, this is. I mean, it's neat, particularly like seeing the Super Famicom version versus the what we got with the Super Nintendo, just in the coloration of the buttons.
Right.
Which
obviously the design is the same in North America, right? But just to get that sort of softer lavender color with the sort of deeper royal purple or whatever that color would be.
Mm-hmm. It's a weird coloration, right? Especially because it's going from that black, gray, red
scheme. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that it's a bit soft, though. I think it was an interesting choice, and I do like it. And a part of me really would prefer the Super Famicom one with its 4 colors, but then I do have an affinity for that North American one. Just that soft purple, like that soft lavender color. I don't think I've ever seen that on a standard, like, not. Now you go to the store and you can see lots of variances in all these controllers and stuff. Mm-hmm. But just like whatever is supposed to be the standard traditional one that just comes packed in, I don't think I've seen that color really since.
Yeah, I can't really think of any that would have done that. Like, then they didn't even. I don't even remember them pushing that with the 64. The 64, they. I don't ever recall really having any. I think my brother tried to get one, or he did have one at one point. The see-through ones.
The atomic purple.
Yeah,
I think those are the only two I have. 2 atomic purples.
Just in general, just the whatever see-through ones. Because there's the blue one, the orange one, the green one.
Yep. Definitely remember there was the green one came with Donkey Kong 64 console.
That certainly is a dated reference as well. It's like, hey, do you wish to be able to see into whatever the technology is?
Which wasn't much to see, really. There's no like really moving parts or anything.
Right.
I think once you got to the PS3 era, right, and PS2, when you had rumble effect and stuff in there, and you can see those 2 gyroscope things that are rumbling around in the bottom corner of those controllers.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of neat, but otherwise, yeah, there's not a ton to really see going on in there.
Right. But to go back to that purple, that lavender, is a color choice that's really pretty rare. A lot of times it's always a lot of black and red. Special shout out to the most horrific controller that I ever got to play as a kid. That's that god awful. Oh, okay, yeah.
Is it the Atari Lynx? Or sorry, the Atari Jaguar?
Yes, it is the Atari Jaguar.
Yeah, that one also looks a bit like a big flat telephone, like with all the random. What are those keys in the middle of those gray ones?
I don't ever recall using them for anything. Because I only played Rayman, Tempest 2000, and that's really about it. It's like,
because it just has the 3 main face buttons, doesn't it?
Right.
The 3 red buttons. So.
It tries to try to be sort of Sega-like,
sort of,
with its Genesis controller,
but with this extended sort of almost keypad, right? Almost like a calculator pad on it. It's a very bizarre looking controller.
It's not. I don't recommend it. Not recommended.
Yeah, I only know one person who owns a Jaguar, and we, even though they own it, we still just laugh about how pitiful a system it is.
Yeah, it was one of those things because the only reason why I remember even being able to play it was one of those things that at a time, and you can probably still do it to some degree, but you could rent out console systems,
right?
And so I remember my dad doing that, and did it a couple times, and it was just like, okay, after a couple times I'm good. I don't ever want to play this thing again.
Right.
Rayman's cool. Tempest 2000, it's more your thing, Dad. But
that's pretty good.
Well, he played the arcade stuff when he was younger, like Tempest arcade game, and it's not that it's a bad game or anything. It's just
straightforward, simple.
Mm-hmm. I don't need
arcade action.
I don't
classic
need
arcade action, I guess.
I don't need a landing pad to play this game. Right. Go away.
Yeah, well. Yeah, that is definitely a funky one. There's probably somebody out there that really likes that controller, but I can't say I've encountered that person yet.
They are wrong. There's nothing else to it. They are wrong. And yeah. That's all there is to it.
Yep.
Now, with the collection of stuff, the Genesis and the Saturn,
mm-hmm.
because their controllers are pretty similar.
Sort of. Like the Saturn is certainly the evolution of that 6-button Genesis controller.
For better, for worse, do you think?
Well, don't forget there's also a Genesis 3 controller that had come out with the Genesis 3 that is still somewhere in between that Genesis 6 button where the top 3 buttons are sort of curved.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Genesis 3 buttons are a little closer to the Saturn style buttons where they're curved inward, sort of, and you can kind of, your thumb, instead of being on top and pushing down, your thumb almost sits like grooved into the button, kind of.
Yeah.
The Saturn, at the time it was the Saturn Japanese controller, but it's the second Saturn controller that came out in North America, is, to me, one of the best controllers you can buy. Like, it has the right weight, it has the right, when you push a button and sometimes it feels like it's a little bit either too mushy or it's a little too firm, or it just has all the right balances, and it's like one of the best arcade style fighting game controllers outside of actually having like a joystick style controller.
Huh. Maybe I just have a smushier Sega Saturn controller. But I don't know. I think I prefer the Genesis controller a bit more. I don't know. There's just something.
It's a little smaller.
I don't know. Well, there's just something. I don't know. There's something about the Saturn one that just feels like, and like I said, it could be the one that I have that makes it feel this way.
What are the shoulder buttons on yours? Are they the ones that like are loose and just kind of almost feel like they're dangling off the side of the controller? Or are they the ones that are sort of curved into the controller where the controller is almost like a soft U shape? Or is it more of like a...
It's a soft U shape.
Okay, so you have the second controller.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other controller, I don't know too many people. A lot of people hate those shoulder buttons on that first controller. But I find that the face buttons are really almost identical to the other controller. But I think people like the way it's curved and it seems to fit better in your hand, that second one.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't hate the first one. I think it's not perfect, but the face buttons are at least good. It's the shoulder buttons that are terrible.
Right. I mean, I will agree that... I think... So I will agree that the buttons for it, the face buttons are really, really... They're resistant, but not, like, stuck in mud.
Right.
If that makes any sense. There's just a very strong click to it. However, I do like the very, like, the very weak ones for the Genesis, where it's almost like you're not even pressing anything. You're like, all right, am I really actually pressing a button?
Do you find that on the top or the bottom set? I find the top set, they're quite firm, and the bottom set is
the bottom set.
Yeah, they're a little more, I don't know, loose or soft, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know if that's just because, you're going to be using these buttons a lot more, so.
Generally speaking,
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Because even the top buttons are smaller. And so I thought that was weird, whereas with the Saturn, they're closer in size on the top and bottom. So, actually, the Saturn 1 controller, the top 3 are closer to the Genesis 2 controller, 6 button. But then they're a little bit bigger on the second one, if I remember. They're so similar, right? They're very, very similar.
Right.
Yeah, I like that controller. It's funny, just not necessarily in preparation for us to talk today. I just kind of pulled up, I went on Google and just said, what are the best controllers? And a whole bunch of websites have obviously a bunch of different opinions on stuff. The Saturn controller doesn't really land on, nor the Genesis 6 button. I think the Genesis 6 button was on one or two of these lists at maybe like, number 10 or 9. But I don't see the Saturn one anywhere to be found. And I thought that was kind of interesting because I would say not that long before some of the more modern controllers, it was considered one of the top 5 easily. So I'm very interested that it's been sort of displaced with some of these other ones. Even things like
doesn't have
PlayStation 1 controllers on these lists. And I'm like, and this is the one without analog. And they're like, this is one of the best controllers. I'm like, have you used a PS1 controller without analog recently? It's pretty bad.
Oh yeah, I'm not a fan of the PS1.
That D-pad's pretty garbage. Like, it doesn't have a good feel at all.
I remember having to play Chrono Cross without
analog.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I'm like, this sucks.
Yeah.
I want my analog stick. This is not.
When you're missing the 4 direction corners because it on that pad, right? It doesn't feel right. Something feels off.
Well, then it's. I don't like the ergonomic design of it either.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something. There's the. I don't know how to say it other than like the teeth where you put the palm of it in your hand kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems off to me.
Mm.
It's just like, this is just not comfy.
Okay. Yeah. But most of these lists, I think, for me personally, I think they're too, they lean far too in the present. A lot of these lists have things like the PS4, the current Xbox Series controller, like those elite ones, those, they're like $200 some odd or whatever ones. The PS5 controller, and I'm like, and it just seems like all the other controllers have just been like shoved off to be like, no, these, this is the best it's ever going to be. So there seems to be a bit of a recency bias on a lot of these lists.
Well, that, and it's like they disregard all of the different sort of peripheral stuff for PCs.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
well, these are specifically stating that they are console.
Oh,
so they're not trying to ignore that. They are stating that
because they can't compete because it's the PC and the keyboard.
No, whatever. The PC and this whole idea of like, oh, it's a perfect world. If it was so perfect, you wouldn't have to buy 500 things to build one. Like,
that's what makes it so perfect.
Yeah.
You can build your own.
Customizable.
Yeah.
Some people just want that grab and go play, right? They don't care about all that excess, right? And for those that do, it's great that option's available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, I'll be honest, I haven't really dabbled much in PS4 or later. So, like, in just a physical sense, I'm like, oh, I can see them and be like, okay, those are the controllers. But, like, I haven't even touched a PS5, nor
no, I haven't either.
Xbox Series X, Q3, whatever.
Way to go, Microsoft, with all your poor naming. And
they are really very much feeling like current, like modern day Sega, in a way, right? They are the modern day Sega of the 90s kind of thing.
Microsoft?
In a way, don't you think? With just some of the...
Yes and no.
Like with the naming conventions and just
that part I could see, but I think the problem with Microsoft is Microsoft continues to want to produce things that appear unique and edgy, and they fail miserably at that. It's just like, here's another Forza game, here's another first-person shooter. There doesn't feel like there's a lot of sort of where Sega's like, oh, we're gonna make a game about a taxi. Like there's the creativity feels quite stymied in a lot of Xbox games to me.
It's very artificial. It's like the dude at the office who's trying to be edgy to rekindle and reunite with their inner edginess from their teen years.
Where Sega kind of put their money where their mouth is to their own disadvantage, right? Of like, well, we're going to make a game about a fish man that talks to you. Like some really bizarre stuff that really probably undid them in a lot of ways, not only just because of a lot of poor hardware choices and stuff, but we're really always just looking for that next weird thing that might get done.
Burn, I think being able to at least stymie that with the PS1 and PS2 to some degree, where they had to work at it, being able to burn their games.
Microsoft just has an endless pit of money, though, too, right, that they can continue to access, so forth. But yeah, anyways, it is too bad that these lists seem to be focused a bit on that recency bias. I will say the one thing about the PlayStation controllers, so after you get that PS1 revamp into the analog controller, the PS2 doesn't feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't feel like there's any change in the PS2 controller, is there?
Heavier.
Yeah, so other than that, though,
Yeah, it's pretty much in line from what I recall. I remember
Shape-wise, it looks identical.
Yeah, some of the analog early PS1 stuff was almost like they were really, really light plastic. Some of them almost looked like they were like wiffle ball, if I remember correctly. At least some of the ones I remember handling. But it's very light, and then once you shift it to the PS2, it's like, oh, let's put a stake in here and actually build a foundation off this thing and not just kind of tack this on.
Well, and that's the weird thing about the PS3. The first time I picked up a PS3 controller, I seriously thought I was picking up almost like a feather. It feels so light. I thought, wow, they've been able to improve the quality and the product so much that it's essentially a PS2 controller that doesn't need to be plugged in, and the components inside they've advanced so far that it can feel this lightweight and basically be that previous model, but kind of quote unquote better, if you will. And then you get to the PS4 and you're like, why is this so heavy again? Like somewhere along the way, the PS3 was this feathery light controller, super easy to handle. And then you go back to this heavier weight controller with the PS4, which is still, again, design wise, until this PS5 sort of redesign that's a little more, I don't know, the curvatures are a little bit different, right? More of a V or U shaped in the controller. Other than that weird faceplate that they added on the PS4, it's essentially the same design, for 4 generations of console, essentially.
Right.
Until this new one, which still is quite similar, but you can see there's some new differences to how it would handle and hold.
Right. And this is I guess, the interesting balance you try to make. It's like, well, you have this really fantastic design, and then people will be like, well, why change it, The tire. Look at the tire and all this sort of stuff. And it's, I think at times it's like, oh, well, you need to do something a little different.
Right.
Because it's the future.
Right.
Kind of thing. And I get it. That's where I think, they at least try to do it on the Nintendo side of things. It's like, oh, well, we're going to do the 64, which is some sort of cyclopean nightmare.
Yeah, sort of a W shape to it.
It's the Wario controller. But it's, I'm still baffled that got across, and they're like, yes, this is the design we were going with.
Well, especially because that middle analog control area became so prevalent that the D-pad, I mean, I don't know of many games that actually use the D-pad for much. Maybe it's like you cycle through items or something like that. But it's so weird to have to now go grab the D-pad because the analog is used. The only ones I can think of are some of the THQ wrestling games, where you only use the D-pad, and then when you're going to use a special move, then you use the analog stick.
Oh, jeez.
Like you just flick the analog stick basically. So yeah, it's not like you switch to move your character or anything. You're moving the character around only with the D-pad. And then once it gets to, like, your special meter kind of builds up, and then, if you put the character into the right positions to do the special move of that wrestler, you just hit the analog stick and it just automatically does it. So it's not like you just literally like just flicking the analog stick basically. But that's the only game I can right off the bat think of that doesn't just.
I'm trying to wonder if like
Jet
Force Jim and I had something with it, but I don't really recall. It's been forever.
Yeah, and I can't recall either. But
yeah, it is literally the appendix of gaming controllers, because it's like, it's here.
Right.
It has a function. Does it?
Right.
Yeah. It is a weird choice to have been like, yes, let us have this. Almost as some sort of, it's that philosophy of the lateral thing with their technology kind of thing, where it's like, we don't know what to do with this, and I think we should keep it. And it's like, okay, well,
Hope it sticks.
hope it's right here. Hopefully.
Those analog sticks on those controllers are miserable. Like, every time you see a N64 controller out somewheres, and you pick it up thinking, oh, I might get this for $3 or something, some cheap deal, and then you realize that the analog controllers they're all floppy and because they're so overused.
Right.
I think there's people that just constantly sell those as replaceable parts because they're so bad, right? Like, they just don't last.
They feel like some sort of joystick toy that you would get out of like a Happy Meal.
Yeah.
Or something.
Something like that. Yeah.
I have somewhere buried in some box or something one of those from when Mario Kart 64. The Happy Meal toys. I have one of those. Somewhere. Not in great condition or anything like that, but its joystick is probably on par, if not a little better than a lot of the 64 ones.
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty awful.
Yeah, it's too bad that they're so flimsy. And obviously, as designs have gone on, they've been on a better. I think it has to do with the swivel part is probably not that strong, and then also the neck of that analog stick is quite narrow.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you look at, say, a PS4 one or Xbox, there's a lot of support there for underneath the controller. So that's probably a big part of it. But I hate the N64 controller. I think it's garbage. I know a lot of people do like it, but I don't think it's a
those people are liars.
Design.
Liars. Fibbers.
Yeah, I don't like the design of
it. They are living in some fictional fantasy world. No.
But it is one of the first to introduce, like you said earlier, all these different colors, is it not?
It had blue, green, yellow, red.
Did the PS1 have all these colors? I don't recall. I think later on it did.
I think it did, but it was.
I remember a translucent green
through the line,
and which the PS2 also had.
I was just talking the buttons. I see what you
mean. Oh, like the actual controllers. I know the PS2 definitely did. But I thought the PS1, like the late lifespan.
PS1 had like orange.
Okay.
Or something. I could be wrong.
I don't remember. The standard gray, and then once the PS1 mini release, then they were kind of more that almost between a white and a very light gray.
Right.
That seemed to be the standard colors. So. Yeah. But yeah, I don't like that N64 controller. I'll tell you which controller I really hate, too.
Uh-oh.
And you see on all these lists of, it's the best controller ever conceived by man. Yes, the GameCube controller sucks. Like, I do not like that controller. I know that a lot of people do. I think it's just their Infinity, yes, for one particular game, and that's fine. But I do not like the button layouts. I don't mind the X and Y. Like, I think that they have an interesting shape, and it's fine. I don't need a gigantic singular button like for most actions. I don't like that controller. I don't like the weird gap space between the middle, and I know it's very in line with a lot of the other controllers that we have now, like the 360, which, as you said, unfortunately Microsoft's kind of done the same thing as Sony of just little tweaks here and there, but it's more or less the same controller. Yeah, and I know the GameCube, some people will make that argument. Well, those controllers kind of also mimic the GameCube, but it's like, well, the PS1 analog did come out before that, so. So, yeah, I'm not a fan. I don't like the feel of it.
Big gripes that I have against it are the shoulder buttons. And I don't like the shoulder buttons.
The Z button for no real reason. Just to add an extra button.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand the thought process behind it, but the shoulder buttons are those are way too loose for my liking. And I get you can kind of hear the click and stuff. There's just it's just an odd. It's almost like you've got to push it in too deep.
Yes, actually that's true. You do have to push them pretty far, and that weird curvature forces you to do so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a little odd. And then having, like you said, the Z button be this tiny little thing just kind of snookered back there. It's like, I actually liked the 64 version
of the Z button.
Well, yeah, because it's more of a trigger. Like that one,
right.
That one actually, that one that was fine. Mm-hmm. This one not so fine.
Yeah.
And then, having the big A button and then the tiny B button.
Play that Mega Man collection on there.
Absolutely have, and it's awful.
It's just this one gigantic button and
I do not like
button beside.
I am not a fan of that because I remember that was because weren't the Power Battle games on there too?
I think so. You know what is funny? I have the PS2 release and it's been a long time since I've played that particular release. So.
Well, and I just hate playing those games with like the joystick, and so you're trying to use this awful where it was
mini D-pad.
Right. Yeah, no, it's like where it's neglected. It's like, well, this thing is such a we've got to continue to show our appreciation and love for Gunpei Yokoi. Mm-hmm. May his soul rest in peace. So we're just gonna move the D-pad in a little. We're just gonna make it tiny, and if you need it, it's there.
Yeah.
For taunts and melee.
It's a bad size of the D-pad. It's almost an afterthought of, like you said, of just our history, our tradition is to have that D-pad there, so we have to include it somehow. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately.
Yeah, it is. I don't hate it as much as you, but it's not one that I am too keen on. It's just kind of like, okay. Yeah. Meh.
Yeah, I don't like it.
I will say this though. This is, and unfortunately, I feel like Nintendo's kind of slid into this with more of like the Pro controller and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Is that at least for a while they were trying to be different, and I get it. Being different doesn't necessarily mean that it's enjoyable or good or whatnot, but this is where they stumble into the Wii controller, and I personally like the Wii controller because I am super lazy when I play games. So unless you need that motion control, I will lay down like on a couch or something I'm playing, and I'll be playing with the controller like behind the back of my head and just sort of like lounging. I don't joke. Like it is such a great lounge to controller to use because you just kind of like plop it. I know it's I don't know how I do it, but it is, unless you're having to of course use the motion controls or something, it makes it's fine.
Yeah, I don't mind it as well, and I don't mind the motion aspect for quite a few games. I think my favorite thing about the Wii is just the fact that it's a really good light gun shooter console, and it's already kind of built into the system, so you don't have to buy extra peripherals to play. I know you can buy some of these handheld gun things where you can slide the controller into them and so forth. But and it has the trigger, so it brings back the trigger from the N64, and it feels pretty similar. It's got a little more of that hook end to it, so your finger kind of like wraps under that hook part, I guess. But yeah, I personally don't mind it either. I don't like using it as a pseudo NES controller though. When you flip it on the side, I don't like the feel of it. It's too. I think when my brain goes to that place, it's expecting a very specific size and shape of that NES controller, and this one is just too elongated, and the button placement just doesn't feel right, and also the D-pad does seem a touch sensitive and a touch small.
Yeah, it's a little small. The buttons are also a bit small and being more
too weighty on one side because the batteries are on the back end, right? Where the button is, so it kind of feels off.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. It's little, I guess the negative effects of trying to kind of step in both directions. Be like, hey, there's this new thing, but we can still play the retro games on that. You like retro games,
right?
You played the Mega Mans,
right? I bought the peripheral that adds that, not the Pro controller, but that one that's like the whatever they call it. I don't know if it was called a retro controller, whatever the one that attaches to the back end of the Wii controller, and it's sort of a oval shaped controller that's got 2 analog sticks and a fairly large D-pad and bigger face buttons.
It's it's like a solid shape, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I know what you're talking
about. The Switch Pro controller is kind of the modern take on that previous controller.
Right, it's like that first one's the fish, and now it's slowly walking onto land.
Right. It's evolving, but I feel like the face button, I haven't used that Switch Pro controller, but the face buttons look kind of similar. Just all the placement of stuff looks kind of similar, and probably feels a bit more weighty on the newer one, but because this controller is quite light, but it does have decent shoulder buttons and so forth. It's not bad. It was only like a $25. It is a bit flat, but it was only like a $25 piece to add on. Like, I know you're already paying for a Wii remote, but for me, if you're going to play, like, because they had Contra on there, they had the Castlevania Adventure Rebirth on there, like those kind of games, it felt a lot better to play those games with that controller.
Yeah, I agree with that. They also, I think it was for the GoldenEye Wii version, there was like a Golden Pro controller.
Oh, okay.
That came with it. I think it was for that.
Okay.
But it was the Wii Pro, and so the Wii Pro one is pretty light compared to at least the Pro controller for the Switch.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in between there's the Wii U Pro controller somehow fits in between, and kind of again a bit of an evolution.
Does the Wii U actually exist? I don't think that
it does. I have one sitting right behind me.
That is a fever dream that we all collectively had. There was no Wii U. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I'll send you a photo. It's something that does exist, whether you choose to not allow it to exist or not.
I'm gonna say it's photoshopped.
I was just thinking the Virtual Boy controller kind of evokes a bit of the GameCube controller to a degree. Not exactly, but sort of. And it has sort of those long, sort of latched ends that are similar to a PlayStation controller, actually. So I think that they were kind of onto something at that point where they knew they wanted to have these longer grips to fit in your palms.
Gunpei Yokoi knew what he was doing.
Yeah, no, he did. But a controller that I know most people actually hate or do not like very much, and I don't disagree, but I have a kind of a soft spot for, is the Dreamcast controller. I know a lot of people don't like where the cable sits on it because it doesn't sit on the top. It comes out of the bottom, and it feels really odd. People don't like the slot for the VMU cards, and once you have a VMU card in there, it really adds a lot of weight to the controller. And if you add a second one, then it's quite a bit heavier. And then without it, it feels almost like a PS3 controller. Like, it just feels like it's floating. And I know some people just don't like the face buttons, but I like the trigger buttons on the Dreamcast controller.
Okay.
So when you're playing something like Crazy Taxi, they just feel right. Like, they just, I can't explain it. And I know the Xbox 360 controller tried to mimic that with the way it put its triggers.
Right, I guess to kind of step into, like, the PS3 one didn't the trigger, like, for the R2 and the L2, it sort of caved inwards?
A little bit on the
and I didn't like that so much.
A little bit mushy on the bottom part, whereas the PS2 controller still, they were those sort of rectangular shape.
Right. Yeah. And so with the Dreamcast one, because the Dreamcast one I'm not as familiar with. I think I played it all of like 3 times, but it's more it's more of like an actual trigger.
Like a gun
right?
trigger, yes. It's closer to that. Honestly, it added quite a bit of control. So if you're playing something like Crazy Taxi, it had a good sensitivity, right? If you were pushing it just a little bit, the car's only going to move that little bit. If you pull it all the way down, it's full throttle kind of thing. I thought there was a really good dynamic with those triggers. They really seem to find a good balance there. But I know just the overall shape of the controller, most people just don't like because it's quite circular.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can see where that's a discomfort. And the D-pad is not the best. The analog part is solid. I feel it's solid. But if you're going to play, because there's a lot of fighting games on the Dreamcast as well, that controller is not the best for that. You need to go and buy like the joystick controller for that. But I just have a soft spot for the controller as a whole.
Wasn't there like a Sega Saturn controller that's kind of a step into that, where it is circular?
Yeah, it's the Nights into Dreams controller. I have one of those boxed, oddly enough.
Okay.
I got one really cheap in the box.
It just seems like an abomination.
I don't. It's funny. It is definitely the step before the Dreamcast because it is a very circular shape. But the analog is neat because it's really close to the controller, so it's really fat, and your thumb just sits like right in there, and you do have some really good control with it.
It seems like it and the GameCube controller are like a part of the same family tree.
Sort of, but I would put them apart just because the GameCube is much more closer to the modern controller, whereas the I don't know, I'm trying to think of what they called it. The Knights controller, we'll just call it the Knights controller for lack of better terms. The Knights analog controller, it's got much fatter, thicker buttons.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you feel the difference in those two controllers, unfortunately, the Knights controller, it was quite unique in having the analog piece on there, but it also it doesn't have a very nice feel to it, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it feels
just
clumsy.
Like just the face of it. The face of it looks kind of similar in that all the buttons are kind of clumped off to one side, and then
kind of, but they're all the same size and stuff at least.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like
I mean, it does look like
they're all different shapes and sizes, basically.
Like some sort of cartoonish hammer was taken to it to like make some of them just some weird amalgamation of. Oh yeah, certainly.
I really wonder what was the target there to have all these buttons be so different on that GameCube controller.
I thought that was kind of the point. It was, like you said, here's the main button you use, so it's the big one, but then this X and Y you'll use a little bit more frequently, and the B one, you'll know when to use it, because that's kind of an important button. But it's only
Will you, though? Is not the biggest button the most important button now?
Well, the most common, just because it's the most common. I mean, important in the sense of like, oh, this is like a special.
I guess. And the Z button is the secret sauce because it's this little off button that you might
that's how
use.
you make the startup tune.
Yeah, well, I don't know. But yeah, I wouldn't say that the Dreamcast, or sorry, the Knights analog controller is something that most people should seek out for.
It looks like it's
It's an interesting novelty piece, and I think it was really intended to be for Knights for that analog control because it certainly adds something to the Knights game specifically. But I found using it on some other games, it was not like it feels like it should be good for like Panzer Dragoon, but it doesn't feel right. But those triggers that are on the Dreamcast came from that controller, and the triggers and they perfected by the time they got to the Dreamcast.
Gotcha.
What about the Xbox stuff? Like, I mean, you remember when the Duke came out and everyone was giving it a hard time, and then they had the remodel with the S, and then the S basically, once the 360 came out, the only difference really was that home face button, the Xbox circular button there. Essentially the same controller. Otherwise, they took off the little black and white little nub buttons.
Mm-hmm. I kind of forgot about those.
Yeah, most people forgot about those.
I didn't I didn't dislike the Duke controller. It seemed fine. It was
Pretty
just
chunky, pretty big one.
it's chunky, kind of in the same vein as like the Dreamcast, just not as
It's much heavier though.
well.
You throw memory cards in that thing. It's like, I hope you've been working out, because pretty heavy controller.
Yeah, no, I didn't mind that. I think from what I recall, it's not nearly as circular.
The center is, but the wing parts aren't.
Well, that's
a very odd controller. The S for me was much. It felt more proper in my hand. I have heard a lot of people that have bigger hands do like the Duke controller.
Yeah.
Like, not necessarily longer fingers, but if you have like wider, thicker fingers, like that seems to be a controller that just seems to fit better in the hand. Yeah. But I think most players probably don't have such large hands, really. So
it is the meat hook controller.
Yeah, it was an interesting first shot, and how fast they wanted to replace that. I don't even think it was, a year? And they were thinking, oh yeah, we got to replace that thing fast.
Yeah, I mean, good on them to be like, oh, okay, they're not liking this.
Sure, yeah.
Let's tweak this a little bit.
Yep, for sure.
I know they brought it back, I think, for the
whatever, the Microsoft 20th anniversary or something like this.
Yeah. Something. But it's. I don't know. I didn't really play that much of the 360.
Okay.
Kind of thing, and I was like, okay. I mean, part of it's also just not being around for it.
Yeah, and not exactly being a hot seller in Japan.
Right.
Yeah, that
certainly plays a part in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just got a more of a. Maybe this is why I want to make that Sega connection. It makes me feel like the Sega controllers. Like I want to treat it like a frisbee and just fling it. Not because I'm angry or anything, but it just kind of, for whatever reason.
Well, that first Saturn controller certainly feels like a batarang. And then the Duke kind of feels like a heavy batarang. Could do some damage with that thing.
It's the Arkham games batarang.
Kind of.
Just that heavier edge.
Yeah. I liked the 360 controller. I thought it was good. I found that it was quite durable. Like, it seems to have a good shelf life. I haven't really had any problems with my 360 controllers. My PS3 ones I've had to open them up and try to, those darn trigger buttons don't seem to ever want to cooperate.
Mm-hmm.
I find they're pretty well made. I don't have an Xbox One, but I was at a garage sale and I got an Xbox One controller without the battery faceplate for $1. So it was like, well, sure, like it's got the charge cable, why not? And it's still quite similar to the 360, but I did find it was a bit lighter.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you get comfortable with that design, Microsoft's kind of followed through. I know those Elite ones have some movable parts, like you can replace the thumbsticks with some other thumbsticks with different coverings and things on them, which is rather interesting. But I will say this, I think when you go to a store now and you want to buy a game, and when 80% of the products on the shelves are just headsets and controllers now, kind of disheartening when that's really the only way that the companies seem to be making their bread and butter now, is to just sell you these hardware pieces. And not only that, at exorbitant prices, right? Like, you break one of these controllers, you're in for a lot of money to replace them.
See, here's the thing. I don't really recall the pricing of controllers way back in the day.
I don't think they were anywhere near this, though.
Well, probably not.
Like, you're probably looking at $30-40 for a Super Nintendo.
I just remember those hyper garbage Wildcats ones.
The 50-cent bin ones?
Oh, yes. Those are the ones that I got
But those are all third party. I think first party, I mean, at maybe most $50 at most. And I understand there's a lot more technology going into these things, but it's just crazy. Like, you think you could buy a game or you can go buy a controller. because they're so expensive. Whereas before you could get 2 controllers for the price of a game or whatever.
It's the inversion of it, right?
Right.
I was actually, this is something I was talking about with Todd, who was on Rambling Weekly and stuff like that. That like I remember when Yoshi's Island came out, and that game was like $120.
Yeah.
He was like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah." So we've just flipped it. So all the games got cheaper.
Were really high too.
Right, the games got cheaper, but the controllers have skyrocketed in price.
The games are not getting cheaper anymore. They're starting to go back up too.
Dun dun dun! $70.
Yep, yeah, they're definitely going up. So, but it is interesting. I will say this: having not bought the Xbox One or the Series X or whatnot, I think Microsoft deserves some credit on taking their design, keeping it relatively simple and familiar to players. But the thing I find Nintendo and Sony are kind of in the dark on for whatever reason, Microsoft's color schemes on their controllers are really, really pretty. Like they have some really unique shading designs. Like I've seen some of these purple to blue hue ones, or they look really slick. They have a really cool design about them with all these different color schemes and stuff. I think it was a couple of years ago, they had like this, it was like a Pride Month controller or something, but it looked really cool because it incorporated all of these design schemes to it with the colors and everything. And I like that Microsoft is kind of willing to go there with the controllers. And, we talked about computer hardware, right? And having those options and stuff. It seems like Microsoft's trying to almost entice that a little bit to be like, we're kind of in both ends of the spectrum here. We're offering that, PC stuff, sort of. And
with just the games as well, right? Like if you get it here, you can play it on your PC kind of thing. So and I think it's in some way that's kind of bitten in the butt a little bit. Cause
I think so.
It's like, oh, well.
They're losing a bit of an identity there. Yeah. And again, the PC crowd of games tends to, on the whole, like lean into some very specific genres, which the Xbox has done the same. So I think you're probably right in that regard, that they've kind of, you think Sony, you might thinking like, okay, RPGs that are like traditional turn-based RPGs, very Japanese type characters in those games. Sony has their own first-party titles with God of War and so forth. And then you think of like the Microsoft first-party stuff, and it feels rather generic in a lot of ways, right? Like, okay, I got a new Forza coming out, and you definitely have Forza fans, but it's like there's also any number of other racing options, right? They just seem to lack that element.
Their big games are third-party stuff, right? Like
often,
COD
and that stuff ends up being multi-platform for the most part.
Yeah, yeah.
So that definitely hurts them. But back to controllers, when I do see like a wall of Xbox controllers, and then I see Sony and Nintendo controllers, and you're thinking, okay, well, so what? You have a couple of unique color schemes on the Switch, but it's not really that exciting.
Well, then the Switch one, a lot of times it's leaning into, because I have a Kirby themed one. It leans into character themed stuff.
Now, is that the Switch controller though, or is that one of those more like traditional looking stock controller?
It's like a Switch Pro.
Okay, yeah. So it's more like that. It's not the actual Switch. My brain.
Like those little Joy-Cons.
The Joy-Con. Thank you.
Yeah. Now it's
the Joy-Cons are like there's no variety in the colors of the Joy-Cons.
Well, they have a little
plain
bit,
but they're just like straight colors.
It's like I think because the one that I have, oddly enough, is the Animal Crossing one.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's got like the pastels, but I have them covered up with little Kirby plastic. Rubber, not plastic, but rubber.
Right, but that's because you had to buy the specific set for that.
Right.
Like you have the Zelda one, you have a few others, but you can't just walk in and buy some Joy-Cons other than, okay, we've got the purple and yellow set, we have the red and the blue set, we have the hot pink and the green set.
Right, that's it. What I'm saying is like they have the theming ones, but
Splatoon one or whatever, but you have to buy the Splatoon Switch
set.
Well,
I don't think you have to get the whole Switch to get some of those.
I thought you did.
I could be wrong.
Maybe you're right though. Maybe you're right, but I just find that they're so lacking.
I get what you mean though. What I'm saying is that they're leaning into the like character and their like the icons as opposed to having some sort of coloration or design and stuff.
Yeah.
So like I totally get where you're going with that. As for the Sony stuff,
they're very generic too. Like I think the PS5 had that big announcement and they were trying to hype up that they had like that red colored one with that purple galaxy one and like a blue one, and it's like these just they're not really moving the needle. Like there's nothing too exciting here. But it happened the same. The PS3 had like a red controller and the PS4 like they're quite plain. They're just like solid colors basically.
Right.
Whereas you go and you walk over to the Microsoft and you're like, whoa, like this, subarctic blue color that bleeds into like this white, which leads into like an aquamarine on the backside. And you're like, this is like, there's just some flair here. This
is where so going back to the Sega comparison, this is where their edge comes out.
Only in their controller
not quite
colors.
in the games. That's quite in the games. Just
that certainly leaves something to be desired.
It has some panache. It has some panache, just not in the games.
Yeah. You give me a House of the Dead controller with like a zombie hand like dangling off it or something, that'd be kind of cool. But like even going like to these funky designs, right? The chainsaw controller. And there was the Onimusha 3 katana controller. There's been some really unique controllers for sure.
That's the word for it.
They're just really collector's pieces. They're quite valuable, some of them now too, as a result. But
of course,
yeah, I don't know how functional some of those were, but those two definitely jump out and come to mind.
The keyboard one for the GameCube.
Oh right, yeah, that's right, and it had the side ends were basically just like if you pulled a GameCube apart and it had a keyboard in the middle. I forgot about that.
Right.
So my brain went to the Dragon Quest keyboard, but that's just a keyboard with Dragon Quest themed keyboards. So
yeah, not quite.
Yeah, no, that's true. I forgot about that one.
That's an abomination.
Yeah, that's quite ugly. Did that come up because of Phantasy Star Online?
I believe so.
Is that the only reason for that? Yeah, that's rather bizarre. And there's obviously always
or that
controllers, right?
Wasn't there like a wasn't there something for like the PS2 as well? Maybe not quite the same sort of thing for like Final Fantasy 11.
Or was that like a keyboard controller?
I could be wrong.
There could have been. I don't recall. I know the Xbox 360 had this little attachment that you could put underneath that attached where your headset could go, and it was like a little sort of like BlackBerry style little keyboard thing.
Yeah.
But it was something you bought, additionally, and you attached on, and it was maybe this, I don't know, maybe 15 centimeters in width or something like that.
Okay.
15 by 10 maybe or something like that.
Yeah.
And, you didn't have to buy it. It was just an additional thing if you wanted to be able to text chat while you were playing instead of just using the headset to talk. So. But
the
fishing controllers.
Yeah.
So you had the one on the Dreamcast. You had the PlayStation 1 had one as well.
Yeah.
The Dreamcast Samba de Migo Maracas.
The Donkey Konga.
I have Donkey Kong.
Bongo drums.
There's only 3 games that I'm aware of that works well.
There's
4 games actually. We got Donkey Konga 1 and 2 in English. There was a Donkey Konga 3 that didn't come out in North America. And then Jungle Beat, which is the action platformer where you have to use the bongos to play. Okay, I don't think you have to, but it's compatible with it. But yeah, there's lots of stuff like that, right? The Taiko Drum Master stuff.
Yeah. As I was going to say, you brought it up. What was it? The VMU? Was that the Dreamcast thing?
The Dreamcast had the VMU,
yeah.
PlayStation had the Pocket Station.
I was going to say, that sort of thing I always really liked, and it's a bit of a bummer that drifted away from it, because I always liked plugging in the memory cards or the Rumble Pack in like the 64 controller. Especially the Rumble Pack. That Rumble Pack was stupid big. Yeah. And it just made the 64 controller be like that much more unwieldy.
Yeah, because the way it also hung down, like it was sort of, like the memory cards would just kind of like slide in and kind of fit compactly, whereas that thing just kind of jutted out, and it just didn't seem as if it belonged.
Oh, it turned into a weapon. Like it was like
it took double A batteries or triple A batteries or something
for the Rumble Pack.
Yeah, didn't it?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I think I have one somewhere in the box, but I don't recall really using it. I thought it took like triple A batteries or something.
If it did, it would take triple A, I think.
Yeah.
I don't recall.
I thought it did.
Well, because I know for the most part, even though I thought it was neat and stuff, I would use the memory card because of Doom 64. Doom 64 required it, which was a very disheartening thing to first learn because
on the cartridge.
Yeah, because you're like, oh,
yeah,
can't save this game.
Most N64 games didn't require that, but yeah, memory cards kind of flew away rather quickly, right? Like as soon as they seemed to be able to move on from them, they were just gone, I think. And then the Vita definitely put that in its coffin, basically, right, with the stupid pricing that Sony was putting on those Vita memory cards.
Right.
Like, what was it for, like, the 120 gigabyte was some really obnoxious price, maybe like 200 something or something. Yeah. It was dumb. It was really dumb.
And it's a shame too, because there was that, and there are people who point out about how neat it was to have the little icons for saves and stuff like that.
For sure.
Especially like the PS1 and PS2.
Yep, Dreamcast had that. Yeah, Dreamcast had that too.
Okay.
Yeah. Not as cool as like the PS2 ones were a lot better than the PS1. I think right. The PS1 just tended to be, square shape, whereas the PS2 might be a little character model or whatever, right? So like an item from a game, things like that. So, yeah. But yeah. Controllers. I don't think I have too much more I can go on for controllers.
The only thing I want to bring up about that is it's not necessarily it's an evolution, but it's like a birthing of like the how they try to emulate stuff on smartphones.
Okay.
I don't like it. I don't like it one bit.
Well, don't they have some peripherals that you can send like a Bluetooth controller to your phone?
Yeah. But if you don't and you're just trying to play it on the screen and stuff, and yeah, like
I'm taking a quarter of the screen to.
It's just not it quote unquote works, but no thank you.
Games that need precise, distinct actions and stuff, it looks like it's quite miserable.
Mm-hmm.
Like a slower paced. I've seen people play, I don't know, Dragon Quest VIII, for example, on a cell phone, and it's like, okay, well, this type of game doesn't necessarily require exact, precise actions all the time. Whereas if you're trying to play, I've seen some of those videos of Double Dragon, downloads on their phone.
Oh, that sounds awful.
It's absolutely awful. Right? Like, yeah, they can't control properly, and you're wandering all over, and you die. But a turn-based RPG should be, I think, somewhat manageable.
Yeah. It's still, I don't like it.
Yeah, I could see that.
Oh, I'm sorry, go.
No, nothing. I was just going to say, it's not like a Vita or a DS, right, where there seems to be, the devices are created with the intention of having accuracy. Mm-hmm. Cell phone might not be necessarily created for that exact accuracy, like, when your thumb touches something and it's close enough, so it'll open an app or whatever, so...
As I say, something that we didn't really touch too much on is the portable controllers with the Game Boy and...
Yeah, I was kind of like leaning away from that just because they and themselves are such unique devices that, like their input and everything is so different that I thought maybe at some point we should just talk about... I know we have a bit of an affinity for a lot of handheld gaming, so... Mm-hmm. If you want to, we can certainly jump into it a bit.
Well, I mean, I'm not opposed to it just kind of glossing over at least some of it, because, you get the Game Boy for a while, kind of I mean, well, with what you had that pocket and color are all the same.
Yep. Just like
outside of
size of console.
Yeah, that pocket one was so tiny.
Yeah, pretty tiny.
But I didn't mind the Game Gear.
The Game Gear's not bad. The buttons are kind of mushy though.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have like a really nice recoil to them.
Yeah.
And neither does the D-pad. Like it's kind of bad. I'll say the Lynx is worse. Like especially the D-pad. The D-pad is just this mushy mess. Like it just doesn't feel right. Mm-hmm. But I don't remember the face buttons being too bad, but the D-pad was not very fun to use.
I will say this: I don't like the design of the DS.
Which one?
The first.
Oh, and I'm the complete opposite. I much prefer those buttons. I think they're far more responsive and they're tight and they click properly. And the DS Lite can go to hell. Like I hate the way those buttons feel. You barely touch them and they feel like they're just like janking around in there. And I don't. Well,
no, I'm not a big fan of the design of it. Period. Just in general, more than anything. But I don't like that first one. That first iteration, just I don't know, or something. Like, I think it's because I actually really like the SP.
Okay, I like the SP too.
And like I like how it can be just like it's a little clamshell. You just kind of close it up.
Yeah, it can fit in a standard pocket on your shirt.
Right, and I have fond memories of playing some games on that, like Bomberman and stuff. But
one of my favorite consoles.
It's great.
It's quite underappreciated now. I think when the Game Boy Advance came out, I think it was quite well loved, and then because the DS was so successful, it was forgotten quite quickly.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I like both. I like the DS and I like the Game Boy Advance quite a lot. Like I have an original Game Boy Advance and clamshell. I really spent hours and hours on both. And the DS I really enjoyed too. And then the 3DS came along and I was just like, yeah, I'm glad that this series is ending because the 3DS is terrible.
Yeah, that's kind of what I want to really loop to, is that the 3DS, maybe the XL is a bit better, but I still have
is okay.
Yeah, the original one, which is tiny, and that joystick. I mean,
it's not good on the XL either.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, it's
just kind of hope it'd be a little bit better.
That's not good. I think I have every version of the DS. And then I have the 3DS. I've been looking for the 2DS final release, like the one that was like the new 2DS, the clamshell.
Oh, I forgot about the 2DS.
Yeah, so I have like the ugly 2DS that came out, like the.
Is there an unugly version of the 2DS?
Yeah, because there was the clamshell one.
They actually did a clamshell 2DS.
They did a clamshell 2DS that was like the final thing that came out for that whole line.
Why would they do that?
Because it was like the 3DS XL, but because I think they could just push it that far, right? They went to 2DS and then they just had like the new 2DS or whatever. And I missed it, and that thing goes for stupid amounts of money now. Like I just was like waiting to find one for a decent price when they knew they were going to offload them. Couldn't find one, and now people are trying to sell like brand new ones for anywhere between $300 to $500 easy.
Oh Lord,
it's stupid.
That's a lot. That's
yeah. I have all the DS models though, and I just don't happen to have all the 3DS. I don't have the first one like you have. I don't have that one. But even those go for something about the 3DS. There's a bit of a fervor for it. I think.
Well, I think because a lot of people are nostalgic about it
to a degree, and then I think also that I think many people don't believe that most of those games will end up anywhere else. Like Nintendo won't find anywhere else to put them at any time. You might get some sort of remasters, but they'll find a way that they take away the sort of 3D capability and stuff like that. So,
oh darn!
Well, not only that, but just like the way it fits on a DS, like the way the two screens fit. Like they did that with The World Ends With You, where they brought that to Switch, And I always hear like everyone say how bad a port it is because it just doesn't feel right on the Switch. Like it's just this weird conglomeration of like trying to fit the two screens on and everything. So I think that could be partly why the 3DS has a bit of a following.
That's fair.
Yeah, but I'm not 100% certain of that. That and just as a whole, how stupid everything got, right? Of everything's worth $1 million, so.
Well, I mean, that's just because
get everything and anything you can get your hands on.
It's only worth $1 million because of inflation.
Yeah. When inflation goes down, it'll be worth $999,000.
Hyperinflation.
Yeah. So.
Oh boy. All right. Well, on that spectacular note,
we forgot Ye Old Wonder Swan.
It's
a very unique face with
it's a face.
Like basically 8 buttons on one side.
It's a face only a mother can love.
I never like the color. The color looked okay. I only have the original Wonder Swan.
It just always felt really flimsy to me. Like I'm gonna break the thing, not because I'm like mad, but because I accidentally pressed the button too hard.
It also
just gonna shatter.
It also suffers from one side feeling a little too heavy and the other side feeling a little too light. The way the battery sits in there and stuff, it feels a bit. Yeah, it just doesn't feel quite right. Yeah.
Now, weren't there some versions that didn't have like a headphone jack or something?
I'm not sure about that. I have the original one. I'm pretty sure it has a headphone jack on it. So pretty sure
there's something that or just that or just the speaker quality on it wasn't the greatest.
No, I don't think generally it had a particularly good speaker sound. So,
but it did have things like Romancing Saga, Final Fantasy.
Well, the color did at least.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking more the color.
Yeah. No, I've only got the original, so I think the original is quite a limited library, and I think that's where they were like, well, people did buy this. Let's see, how does this color going to sell, kind of thing.
Right. Let's make it colorful.
Yeah. Graphically, like the color looks quite nice. Like honestly, like it is quite a step up from the first model, which is much more in line with like the original Game Boy. So.
Right, where the one colors more in line with like the Game Boy Advance.
Closer to, like it's somewhere in between that Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance. Yeah, but I think you're right. It's probably a little closer to the Game Boy Advance, which is a huge step up. So.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's it. Yeah,
pretty exhaustive. I know there's still other things like we didn't do the TurboGrafx controller. Like
that doesn't count.
Why would that not count?
Because I said I've never played a TurboGrafx. Okay, so
then that's
so outside of just seeing it, gawking at it like it's a weird zoo animal. I don't really have.
But then you went ahead and but I've got to make sure I play that Lynx controller.
I did not.
You and your fond memories of your Lynx time with the Lynx.
Lynx is a Jaguar.
Sorry, the Jaguar. I keep saying the Lynx. Sorry.
Yeah, and it wasn't
because I have a Lynx. I don't have a Jaguar. I'm jealous I don't have a Jaguar.
It's not like I have one. It wasn't like it was anything other than being foisted upon me.
Yeah.
To be like, hey, we have Super Nintendo at home. It's actually the entire Jaguar.
This controller isn't bad. That we didn't. Is the 3DO controller isn't terrible.
That's another one I'm not familiar with at all. I never played.
It's somewhere between feeling ergonomically like a Super Nintendo controller shape wise, but the buttons are closer to the Genesis. But they're smooth, so it's not bad. Like I remember being not terrible.
Okay.
Yeah, and then like the TurboGrafx one is fine. It's quite similar to the NES. It's just a little bit softer.
It's like the Master Systems too.
Yeah, the Master System is close to the NES, like at least shape-wise and everything, right? Being so rectangular, but then the buttons are a little fatter and a little bit more. I feel like they're a little bit looser. So, Yeah, I'm sure we can find some more if we really had to. That's pretty exhaustive.
I think that'll. I think we just press pause on it. And let the pause music play out for it. But Yeah, with all that controller talk, I don't know. Give us some feelings on them. What's the general vibe for the controller there? What's ones that you enjoy or not enjoy? And I don't know. Is there a way that you'd be any idea to think of to be like, hey, this could be made better? Let us know. Any last comments and words, jokes you want to tell?
No, but I do remember. So I do remember reading some news article about, and this is a long time ago, people that were using the fishing controllers that came out for the the Dreamcast and PlayStation 1 and trying to beat fighting games and stuff with them.
Oh,
remember that was a thing for a while?
I mean, they do that now with like, oh, we beat Dark Souls with a DDR pad kind of thing.
Geez, yeah, so some kind of goofy things like that. I guess if you really want to try to challenge yourself.
Yeah. I mean, if what's that? It's if that's the way you're having fun, then
sure. It's just it's certainly a unique challenge. Although it would be pretty funny for a kid to open up, Christmas Day, opening up a present. And say, oh, I got a, whatever console, and it only had like a fishing controller with it for some reason. So if you were forced to use that as your your main device.
I don't know if that would be really fun or not.
It'd be pretty funny to watch a kid try to get enjoyment out of something.
I'm not doing that seems really mean. It's gonna be like, I don't like video games. I'm good. I'll go outside.
Maybe that's the whole intent is get them off the TV.
Yeah, until you get the ones that are stubborn enough to be like, no, I'm gonna
beat this with this fishing controller.
We'll play the video game.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. All right. I guess with all that said, thanks for listening, and have a good day.